For 14 months, the house paid for itself. In month 15, the calendar went silent. The mortgage did not. The notification tone had once been a soft, synthetic chime, the sound of perfect calibration. From 300 miles away, Daniel Mercer watched the digital calendar fill, convinced he had engineered a flawless revenue engine. He had not simply purchased a $780,000 suburban property. He had constructed a system designed to convert occupancy into surplus. Every automated lock, every premium amenity, every calculated upgrade existed for one purpose: optimization. And it worked. The incoming capital absorbed the $4,000 mortgage, the cleaning contracts, the utilities, and the maintenance, leaving a predictable margin. Wood, glass, and heavy debt had been transformed into a self-sustaining machine. The structure felt obedient. The leverage felt intelligent. But engines built exclusively for perfect conditions cannot survive a change in pressure. When the environment shifted, there was no crash, no warning siren, no dramatic collapse. There was only silence, an empty calendar, an immaculate house, and a fixed debt that never stopped breathing. Welcome to the Financial Autopsy. This archive does not examine how wealth is built. It documents how financial structures fail under pressure. We do not judge the operator. We isolate the decision, the assumption, and the chain of consequences that follows. Step inside the physical space of his investment. A smart thermostat hums against freshly painted drywall. Automated locks engage with a precise metallic click. This is a $780,000 suburban property, purchased with 20% down, engineered to function as a frictionless asset. But for Daniel Mercer, a logistics project manager trained to eliminate inefficiency, stillness is unacceptable. He spends his days removing idle capacity from complex systems, watching pristine, unoccupied square footage through a screen. The silence no longer felt like safety. It felt like waste. He stopped seeing a house. He saw underutilized infrastructure. He decided the structure needed to work. Procedural access to this file remains active below. Maintain clearance within the archive before the timeline proceeds. The blueprint was executed with corporate precision. Daniel treated the 4-bedroom property not as real estate, but as a logistical operation. Designers optimized every room for digital scrolling. Cleaning crews rotated with mechanical efficiency. The structure was calibrated to convert temporary occupancy into measurable return. For 14 months, it worked. The platform's algorithm favored his listing. Every Friday, a booking notification landed with reassuring regularity. The incoming capital absorbed the $4,000 mortgage, the utilities, the maintenance. The debt felt engineered, contained, obedient. He was generating a frictionless surplus. To a man trained to trust data, this was proof of mastery. The numbers were stable, the calendar was full. Because demand was abundant, he mistook favorable conditions for structural durability. The leverage was significant, but it felt invisible. Then, the friction appeared. In the 15th month, a Friday passed without a notification, then another. Gaps widened from hours to days. The local market had quietly flooded with identical, perfectly staged properties. The algorithm did not fail. It recalibrated. The house sat empty for a week. Then 2. The mortgage did not recalibrate. The structure was still heavy. The revenue was no longer guaranteed. The silence inside the property had weight. When the calendar was full, the $4,000 mortgage was invisible, absorbed by strangers before Daniel ever confronted it. Now, with rooms empty and smart lights illuminating unused space, the debt became visible. Property taxes, insurance, and maintenance did not pause. They ticked forward against zero revenue. Another operator might have treated this as a structural warning. They might have converted the home into a long-term lease or exited at a controlled loss. Daniel did neither. He did not see instability, he saw inefficiency. Instead of retreating, he forced the system harder. He lowered nightly rates. He paid for premium placement. He pushed the listing into visibility, effectively paying to keep the illusion alive. The bookings that returned were thinner, margins shrank, wear increased, cleaning costs remained fixed while revenue compressed. The machine was still running, but it was no longer producing surplus. It was consuming it. The surplus disappeared. The house was no longer frictionless infrastructure. It was fixed weight, tied to variable demand, and it had begun turning inward. The breaking point did not arrive with a siren. It arrived with an update. By early autumn, the local short-term rental market reached saturation. Bookings dropped 40% in a matter of weeks. The house, once designed to autonomously capture capital, sat still while the mortgage remained perfectly intact. The environment shifted. The debt did not. An ordinary operator might have recognized the structural warning and retreated. Daniel did not. He did not see systemic risk. He saw underperformance. To correct it, he escalated. He financed luxury upgrades, installed premium amenities, paid for aggressive platform placement. He attempted to force visibility in a market that no longer needed him. To fund this push, he made the calculation that permanently altered his trajectory. He drained his liquid reserves, transferring the safety of his W-2 savings into the walls of an empty structure. What he labeled temporary optimization was, in reality, exposure. He increased fixed costs at the exact moment revenue volatility was accelerating. From this point forward, the structure was no longer under pressure. It was unstable. Examine the architecture you are currently operating. Are your assets producing surplus, or are they quietly consuming liquidity? Submit your structural diagnosis below before the collapse proceeds. Winter arrived, and the system stopped producing. The platform push had failed. The property stood immaculate and empty. The mortgage, the utilities, and the newly financed upgrades now formed a fixed, inescapable weight. To avoid the humiliation of selling at a loss, Daniel made his final calculation. He liquidated his primary W-2 emergency fund, transferring the cash he once called security into an asset that was no longer generating income. He told himself it was temporary, a bridge, a controlled adjustment. It was exposure. The collapse did not involve foreclosure notices or dramatic seizures. It was quieter than that. His W-2 salary, once the foundation of his stability, was now fully absorbed by the second home. He worked 50 hours a week to maintain an empty structure. The floors remained spotless. The climate control hummed. The architecture was flawless. The liquidity was gone. On a Tuesday evening, the inertia settled. Daniel sat alone on the designer sofa, surrounded by calibrated lighting and engineered perfection. He was intelligent, disciplined, and highly compensated, yet immobilized. There was nothing left to optimize, no variable left to adjust, only fixed debt and silence. The clinical autopsy of this collapse reveals a fatal confusion, the misidentification of a liability as an asset. Daniel Mercer did not acquire a self-sustaining income stream. He assumed a fixed, non-negotiable debt and chained it to variable demand controlled by an external platform. He mistook favorable conditions for structural durability. While the weather was warm, the model worked. When demand normalized, the debt remained. Intelligence did not protect him. Optimization did not save him. In a structure where costs are fixed and revenue depends entirely on algorithmic visibility, efficiency is irrelevant. When heavy leverage meets variable demand, mathematics always wins. This collapse required no flames, no foreclosure notices, no visible destruction. It required only inertia. Daniel continues to work in his executive role, redirecting his primary income to sustain an empty property. The structure stands immaculate. The liquidity does not. Case closed. Financial resilience does not come from maximizing yield. It comes from isolating risk. The F.A.R. system, Financial Autopsy Resilience, was developed to identify structural exposure before pressure reveals it. The documentation is archived below. Collapse repeats patterns. Defensive architecture remains procedural.